The BMF is not a person, it is an idea. The BMF is not membership-based, the BMF is values-based, mission-based organization. For when it started, it had nothing to do with members or numbers. It had everything to do with the mandate, which supersedes the individual. And in time, the individuals will get an appreciation of the mandate and what it ought to do to them, and by extension, the country and the places of work which they move into as they carry that membership.
It says, really, we are about developing managerial leaders, because there are lots of different types of leaders, but our focus is developing leaders in business, whether in government, in private sector, or entrepreneurs. But we also say we want the products of the program to have positive impact in their organizations, first of all. That is why, in fact, the first assignment that people get before the program even starts is called the OOM-CD, OOM-CD.
In reintroducing the Basotho, the BMF has one objective in mind, which is to achieve what we call again in the BMF critical mass of black professionals and executives at various levels. So for many of you who do not perhaps understand the concept of critical mass, as the BMF, we are saying insofar as critical mass is concerned, we want to see a representation of black executives and black professionals at all the various layers. So obviously we need to, there's a clinical case, Babzulu, of a process, you know, where we're saying, for instance, that this is the direction, this is the framework.
Actually see that from the time you enter university to becoming an executive, and most people kind of link that MBA with that step up in terms of having a bird's eye view of the organization and really growing into leadership. So from student chapter all the way to MBA and becoming an executive and becoming a leader and a captain of industry, the BMF is there every single step of the way. And that's one of the things that I love about the BMF, and that's one of the things that I always tell people, this is what we offer, because people
the need to develop the leaders of tomorrow has never been greater. My expectation is that the BMF has to play a central role in developing ethical leaders who are competent and who are also committed to serve the public interest, not sectional interest. As we approach a half-century of BMF existence in 5 years' time, I call on the members of the BMF and the president of the organization to double efforts in the development of the leaders the country needs. The state capture and corruption crisis has demonstrated that the country lacks visionary leadership, leaders with competence and commitment to serve the public. That is, leaders who place the interests of the people they serve above their own. Leaders who do not use their positions to enrich themselves, but to serve others.
Good evening, colleagues. Good evening to all the attendees and fellow panelists. Welcome to this evening's session, which is really about unlocking SMME opportunities in the oceans economy. My name is Papama Mngandi. I am the National Chairperson of the Black Management Forum's Young Professionals. This session is actually being conducted in partnership with Socio-Economic, is it business consulting, if I'm correct, led by Mr. Lwandile Socikwa today. And we've got also guests from the Maritime Business Chamber in the form of Mr. Unathi Sonti and Ms. Nokolo Ngayo from Ocean Econ. Part of why we're here, colleagues, is in the spirit of what we are embarking on in the young professionals, which is to move our discourse on transformation towards spaces that are emergent, towards emerging sectors of our economy. You will know that traditionally our activism has always focused on the established sectors of our economy. We do believe that there are opportunities in emerging spaces, and one such space is the oceans economy, which some may know that stems as far back in the context of South Africa as 2014, when the parliament of when cabinet approved the piloting of what was effectively the Malaysian Big Fast Results, or BFR methodology, which then became known in South Africa as Operation Pakisa. It sets for itself some growth areas which it has prioritized, which include marine transport and manufacturing, led by the Department of Transport, offshore oil and gas exploration, led by the Department of Minerals and Resources, aquaculture, led by the Department of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries, marine protection,
Chair.
I think I've lost him on my side.
The BMF is not a person, it is an idea. The BMF is not membership-based, the BMF is values-based, mission-based organization. For when it started, it had nothing to do with members or numbers. It had everything to do with the mandate, which supersedes the individual. And in time, the individuals will get an appreciation of the mandate and what it ought to do to them, and by extension, the country and the places of work which they move into as they carry that membership.
It says, really, we are about developing managerial leaders, because there are lots of different types of leaders, but our focus is developing leaders in business, whether in government, in private sector, or entrepreneurs. But we also say we want the products of the program to have positive impact in their organizations, first of all. That is why, in fact, the first assignment that people get before the program even starts is called the OOM-CD, OOM-CD.
In reintroducing the Basotho, the BMF has one objective in mind, which is to achieve what we call again in the BMF critical mass of black professionals and executives at various levels. So for many of you who do not perhaps understand the concept of critical mass, as the BMF, we are saying insofar as critical mass is concerned, we want to see a representation of black executives and black professionals at all the various layers. So obviously we need to, there's a clinical case, Babzulu, of a process, you know, where we're saying, for instance, that this is the direction, this is the framework.
Actually see that from the time you enter university to becoming an executive, and most people kind of link that MBA with that step up in terms of having a bird's eye view of the organization and really growing into leadership. So from student chapter all the way to MBA and becoming an executive and becoming a leader and a captain of industry, the BMF is there every single step of the way. And that's one of the things that I love about the BMF. And that's one of the things that I always tell people, this is what we offer, because people don't always know that this is what we offer.
Again, colleagues, my sincere apologies. In the state of South Africa today, there is this creature called load shedding. And no matter how much you try and prepare for them, sometimes they bite. I won't bore you further with my long introduction. I will try and move us ahead to why we are here. And really, again, it's just to say that for those who are joining us for the first time, we were quite inspired by this work that Sociokwa Management is doing around a value chain study and development of a strategy and implementation plan for increased SMME participation in the oceans economy, which is one of the things that we would like to see as the BMF, as a transformation lobby group that stands for developing managerial leaders. So we would like to see more SMME participation in the oceans economy and to see more managerial leaders moving into that emerging sector and hopefully use it to combat high levels of unemployment. So our co-host this evening and whom we see as our partner in this effort, who has graciously allowed us to join part in a conversation that they are formulating, is none other than Mr. Lwandile Socikwa, who is a seasoned businessman and holds an MBA with over 15 years of experience in the field of project management. And he's the founder and managing director of Sociokwa Management. Mr. Socikwa, without any further ado, Mhlekazi, I think it's only fair that you welcome us and give some context to why you invited a lot of people to be here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tadom Nandi. Maybe I think for purposes of being able to attach a name to the face, I will just showcase my face for a second. You will also forgive me. I think in the consistent way of trying to manage the bandwidth, understanding the network issues we're currently experiencing, consequent of the very same load shedding as you referred to, I'm going to switch off my camera, but I thought I should just show my face for all attendees to be able to attach a name to the face. And good evening to everyone, and thank you so much again, BMF, to afford us this platform. So maybe just as an add-on to the introduction, is to probably speak about as to why we are here today, and the work that we are doing as an organization, supporting in the main the work that is being done by the South African Maritime Institute, which is SAIMI. So colleagues, without wasting any time, we've been brought on by SAIMI, as I've mentioned, the South African International Maritime Institute, to assist, as the chair said, or the facilitator, to conduct a research study which is mainly focused at improving and increasing the participations of SMMEs in the oceans economy. And one of the key processes that would be able to lead us to that would be to be able to really map out, first of all, the entire oceans economy value chain. We may appreciate that some of us that we've never really, as a country, gone into say what does this oceans economy entail over and above the initial work that was done, as facilitator had mentioned. And yes, there have been several studies by different institutions, DTIC, and so on. So it's not as if that there's no work that has been done, but focused on a holistic SMME participation in all the subsectors. It's not something that has been done thus far. So we are in the process expected to really elevate some of the legislation that currently governs the space and be able to analyze and assess its impact thus far as it relates to creating opportunities for SMMEs in the oceans economy. But for us to do that, it requires us to be able to really delve into the value chains of each of the subsectors. I think the chair has mentioned the few that I would say in the main, most of us know them to be. While research and emerging studies all over the world, even in South Africa, may be able to suggest that we can go as far as 13 at the least of subsectors in the oceans economy. You speak of the marine manufacturing and repairs, you speak of transport, aquaculture, fisheries, offshore oil and gas, coastal and marine tourism, marine protection and ocean small harbor and coastline development, construction and real estate, which is a very key one as well, that perhaps over the years we've not really focused on, renewable energy, communication. We're living in a world where we are actually evolving and industry is evolving. How do we then embrace and how do we then bring in communication as a key enabler for the work that is happening in the ocean economy? Desalination, skills development and capacity building as a transversal subsector that really anchors the work that would have to be done in research, technology, and innovation. The list goes on. So essentially, ours is to really delve deep into those subsectors that preliminarily were identified and map out these value chains. And as we map them out, we'll then be able to identify opportunities that actually those areas. And you will appreciate that for that to happen, we need to obviously apprise ourselves with the current situation as things stand as to what are some of the barriers to entry of SMMEs, what are some of the challenges that the SMMEs face on the daily, but also to what level of participation as things stand are SMMEs participating in this subsector, which would then be able to give us opportunities to say what other areas of development as it relates to skills that are required in the sector to be able to support the growth of the sector, and what are the possible channels and opportunities that these SMMEs can be able to explore in the various subsectors at different levels of the value chain. And then obviously again, skills, because you need to understand as to if you are able to participate in these sectors, what other support both entrepreneurs, which are owners as business owners, but also over and above that, I think as a BMF, as you said, facilitator, that there are also opportunities that reside there outside of the space that where perhaps we look at only entrepreneurs for employment and so forth. So it's a very interesting time that we go through. And I can say that we are at a stage where we out the value chain to a larger degree of these various subjects. Now, we're really navigating the space and being able to look at the nuances and the challenges. And we are currently interacting with stakeholders, your chambers, your clusters, industry bodies, your individual partners, individual government institutions, the entire set of stakeholders that would really have an interest and play a key input into what would ultimately become a strategy that would then be supported by an implementation plan which hopefully for us would be something that would really be carried out and implemented and adopted by the sector. So I think that is why we are here today, just to talk about that, Chair, but also in the study that we're doing, we are also expected to really assist in establishing a database of these SMMEs. And this database is located now in the various subsectors of the value chain, in the various subsectors of the oceans economy, and the various value chains that which these value chains would have been defined in the subsectors. You would appreciate that most of us, when we speak of the oceans economy, everyone would probably think of the first 3 or 4 subsectors, whereas there's a whole host of other opportunities that sit and that we can be able to look at and see how we are able to bring in SMMEs in that space. So this exercise allows us that opportunity to also collect that database. We have been circulating the database, the webpage, to all interested parties to be able to populate relevant information. Obviously, being cognizant of POPIA, it is really basic information, and also that protection is also guaranteed because it's only information at this stage that would be shared at the approval of the various SMMEs and for purposes of being processed through SAIMI to relevant institutions. So, Chair, I think that is the opening on my side. The last one would be to say that we've always understood some of us Operation Phakisa to be the oceans economy, when in actual fact it's not. And I'm grateful that in your opening remarks you did indicate that really this was a methodology that was adopted by government to really assist in catalyzing and fast-tracking implementation on developmental areas that were identified by government to support the work of the NDP. And amongst those, there are initiatives that sit well outside of the oceans economy, IT, which is health, ICT in education, rural development and agriculture and so forth. So I'm glad that you've been able to provide that context as well, because it then seeds our discussion outside of only the realms of Operation Phakisa, because it is only just a methodology that was really identifying to fast-track certain subsectors of the oceans economy, but really not addressing absolutely the entire value chain and the entire sector. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Socikwa, for that context. And I think what is so important for me right now is that I've inherited a new vocabulary from yourself around this idea of Operation Phakisa as a methodology. And I'll say why that's important for me. There are two provocations that come to mind. The first one is that not long ago, the group CEO of the Transnet group in South Africa was out in East London, and to my unpleasant surprise, her comment in that engagement was that Operation Phakisa is nothing but a wish list that actually is not in real terms a constituted policy program. What I mean by that is that there is actually no budget and allocation that is dedicated to Operation Phakisa. In fact, she went further to articulate that it only amounted to a set of transfers that were just rediverted from other programs of government. So effectively, I think shifting our thinking of Operation Phakisa as something that I suppose is associated with the paradigm of President Zuma and something that he spoke about quite a lot, is that in the mind's eye of many South Africans, they would have thought it's a ready and running a program of government, when in fact it was really, as you say, another sub-vision that is tied to the NDP. And so I raised that because sometimes when we gather in gatherings like this, there's always the question of why do we sacrifice our evening time to be in these meetings? And I think it's important that we understand that when we want to shape these ecosystems in the direction that's going to yield transformed economies that have got our inclusive participation as SMMEs, there's a good time to get in and there's a later time, which is sometimes a bad time. It sounds like in the context of the oceans economy, we're being invited into a community and a conversation where we can get in at the right time, which is effectively today, right? And the second one for me is it draws me back to a conversation by the CEO of TNPA out in Nelson Mandela Bay, or Plebeja, who said to us in an engagement that the BMF had with them was, you know, we can wish all we want about how to make this platform inclusive for your benefit as SMMEs. But if you don't work together and come up with these policy imperatives or these programs that must inform how we as Transnet structure the transactions that are supposed to be for your beneficiation, you're going to arrive too late. So the tendency with a lot of lobbying groups is that we want to always be there to complain about how we are left out. But we don't want to do the toil of being part of exercises like this that require intellectual rigor at times, that require us to read deeper into subjects that we don't know, so that we can be part of the formulations that feed into the policy process. So thank you, Mr. Socikwa, around this idea of Operation Phakisa as a methodology, hopefully a methodology that we will all adopt as we build this community that must go forward in this kind of engagement. And so for that reason, it was necessary for us to invite these two speakers, Usis Nokolo Ngayo, no Mr. Unati Sonti. And also in the audience, I will signal Atenko Sikilani at a later stage, and I'll perhaps demonstrate why when we get to that point, because I think we have an opportunity tonight to frame a conversation that cuts across, first and foremost, from the research and policy level that perhaps Mr. Socikwa is trying to inform through the study for the benefit of SAIMI and the sector, and then equally to the level of the business community and the lobbying groups such as the BMF and the Maritime Business Chamber, but also from a business and lived experience such as Mr. Sonti's business work in the sector, and equally from the professional and the business side of view that Ocean Econ under Usis Nokolo is also operating under. And then I think what Artie is going to do for us later is going to give us a grassroots experience of what it's like to be in a day-to-day oceans economy subsector, so to speak. So without further ado, colleagues, I'm going to invite Ms. Ngayo, who is a maritime economist by profession, and an emerging researcher and project manager in this emerging field, ironically, around oceans economy strategy development, maritime policy, ocean governance, transport economics, port management, and shipping logistics and maritime governance. So I think these are very important areas. And she is a research analyst at the Ports Regulator of South Africa, and a founder and director of Oceans Econ Consulting, which is a consulting company which focuses on research, policy development, strategy, and so on. Without further ado, I think for me, Noxie, without putting pressure on you, I've always said that I wouldn't have known about the oceans economy if I hadn't watched you over the years. I wouldn't care about the oceans economy if I didn't link it to the evolution of your career and your journey. And so tonight for us is a conversational output to reflect on what your journey has been like, hopefully as one way of us contextualizing what the real terms of the aspiration of Operation Phakisa and other things could yield. Over to you, Madam.
Good evening, colleagues. Thank you so much, Mr. Mnandi, for that introduction. From my side, just a brief introduction. I am Nokolo Ngayo. I'm from Ocean Econ. We're from a small consulting company that I started in 2019. And just to give a brief about my journey, as Mr. Mnandi has just alluded to, I studied economics at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, which was SMME at the time. And as I was studying economics, I got introduced while I was working at the faculty office I got introduced to the Department of Development Studies, where they had a program on maritime studies. And I found myself, and I worked there for a couple of years as a research assistant. And while I worked there, I grew an interest in the maritime field. I've always had an interest. My dad, when we were young, worked at Transnet and dealt a lot with Portnet, which is TNPA now. We used to be Portnet at the time. And I got to go on my first vessel, and I've always wanted to know about how do you get on those vessels? How do you get to work on those vessels? And unfortunately, in Port Elizabeth, where I grew up, we did not have any maritime schools at that time. Well, we still don't have any maritime high schools in Port Elizabeth. And also when it got to varsity, there were no maritime related qualifications at the time. So I myself, Papama, was not aware of the industry, although it was always in front of us. And those who have studied in PE, you'll know that every time you by Mount Croix, you can oversee you can see the sea and the vessels. And I grew up seeing these vessels, but I never knew what was happening in that particular sector. And it's so ironic that I studied in both Erika, which is at Mount Croix, and Lawson Brown, which sits on the toppers of Mount, where you see the whole port in Port Elizabeth. And both those school songs talk about the sea and talk about overlooking North End and the town, but we never knew what was really happening in that particular sector. So I was fortunate to be part of the development studies team, and I got exposed to this program, which I later studied. Did my postgrad in maritime studies, and part of that I was introduced to the World Maritime University, and I was fortunate to receive a scholarship to study at the World Maritime University in Sweden, and later came back. When I came back in South Africa and being exposed in the field, although there's a number of opportunities that are available, when we got back, there was, in terms of placing in jobs, the previous groups were already being placed and we were waiting our placement. But then came an opportunity for me to start my own company, because I was always being called to work on various projects. And then I decided, let me open a company myself. As you know, that in South Africa, the unemployment rate is very high. And I am a firm believer that SMMEs have an opportunity to grow the economy of South Africa. SMMEs have an opportunity to create jobs in South Africa. I was able to open a consulting company called Ocean Econ, and we ventured into consulting and also ventured into training. We were fortunate enough to do the Ofred Ocean's Economy Master Plan. We're currently working on a very exciting project which is looking at the socio-economic impact of the bunkering industry in the Eastern Cape. So we are the first female-owned consulting company operating in the space. And as an SMME, we've really had to venture out and go against one of the biggest players that have been in the field for years. But what we've done as Ocean Econ is that we've developed a consulting company that focuses solely on the ocean's economy in developing solutions and strategies and policy for South Africa. We've been fortunate to date. We've worked on 2 policies that have been gazetted. So this goes back to the introduction Mr. Mandi said, is that there's an opportunity for SMMEs to play into the ocean's economy space. And one thing that's very important about the dialogue and the conversation that we're going to have today, which I'm very excited about, is that one question that I get asked often is that, what are the low-hanging fruits? And I'm very excited to see the development of the study that's being done by Socikwa, because often when I meet business owners who want to venture into the ocean's economy space, I always ask them, what is your background? One thing that is great about the ocean's economy space, as you've alluded in your opening, the ocean's economy has always been there, but this has been used as a driver for the National Development Plan to increase the GDP, as the targets have said, the targets that have been set, from 129 million to 177 billion by 2033. We are in 2023 right now, 10 years to the targets that have been set by Operation Phakisa. And what I love about the conversation that we're having today and about this, the study that's being done by Socio-Economic, is that it will really map out where the opportunities are in the value chain. And this study comes at a very paramount time where the presidency has actually gone and looked at on reviewing the targets that have been set for Operation Phakisa. As we know, Operation Phakisa, as the speakers before me have mentioned, is that it was developed in 2014. Currently, we are reviewing, government is reviewing the current methodology that is being used, the Malaysian methodology of Operation Phakisa that was being used. So I'm very excited about the conversations that we're having today. As the two speakers have mentioned, the ocean's economy value chain is wide, ranging from tourism, shipping, to manufacturing. So all the different players that have been there over the years have always been intentional about the transformation agenda. And in the panel that we in today, we have Mr. Sonti, who has been very instrumental in the transformation agenda of the oceans economy. And I'm excited to see on what role they can play to ensure that the low-hanging fruits are really absorbed, and we can put together a plan to ensure that transformation takes place in this in the sector. Just before I close off, in terms of SMME participation, the Department of Transport has been really intentional with the transformation agenda. 2 days ago, last week we were at the BEE summit that was organized by the Department of Transport, which is outlined and they've set out a council to drive the development agenda of the oceans economy. And the new deputy minister has been really intentional with the transformation in the oceans economy, stating that a child from Port St. John's must be able to participate in the trade of South Africa. And we need to ensure that we put systems into place to ensure that that really happens. The Department of Transport has also put together the comprehensive maritime policy, the CMTP, to also drive the transformation in South Africa, the maritime in the maritime sector. So there are a number of initiatives that have been put together, although we feel that at this pace, we should have reached the targets. We are sitting on the 9th year of the development of Operation Phakisa. At this stage, we should have been seeing a number of SMMEs playing in the key sectors of the oceans economy sector, but that is currently not happening right now. And we need to look at where the bottlenecks are. Is the bottlenecks into policy? Is the bottlenecks into red tape? Is the bottlenecks into funding? And therefore we need to draw in those different institutions to ensure that we have the right transformation, the right and intentional transformation taking place. We've seen a lot of participation in the fishery sector with the number of licenses being issued by the Department of Fisheries, and we commend that, but we need to ensure that those fishermen are supplied with the necessary tools to ensure they participate in the larger fishing supply and exports from South Africa. There has been transformation in the manufacturing sector. There's been skills development in the manufacturing, in both manufacturing, but we need to ensure that those who have been trained are given the right tools and warehouses to ensure that they participate in the market itself. So we need to ensure that the transformation that is taking place is intentional. And the only way that we can achieve that is to have these conversations. And I hope that the conversation that we're having today is not just the first one, and it will not end here today. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Noxie. That perspective is exactly what the doctor ordered. So, yeah, 10 points to you. Thank you so much. I'm just struck by the comment that you were making around the existing constraints in the ecosystem. And here's an interesting one for me when you mentioned access to credit. There's a publication that the BMF has called the African Leader. If you pick up the May issue of the African Leader, which I've also shared in the chat. I don't know if the audience have access to it, but maybe Mamelo can help them have access to that link. Ironically, there's an article that reviews the Small Business Development's NISD plan, which it launched late last year. It says here, according to the 2017 Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development study, the portion of bank business lending allocated to small businesses in South Africa is relatively low at around 26%, compared to about 36% in Turkey, 40% in Brazil, and 63% in China. So I think I'm raising that in the context of how do we think about the future of our untransformed economy around fragmenting the monopolies and using emerging sectors like the oceans economy to leapfrog this kind of inclusive participation of the majority of the people who are left out of the economy, so that things like lending of capital are accessible to small enterprises. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have here, is that as we are having this conversation, we must begin to contend with what are the prospects for us to carve out a transformed business outlook, which is an ecosystem where South Africa has got more SMME participation in its economy, which is currently hamstrung by monopolies. Okay, so from Noxie's voice to the voice of someone who works very hard on promoting what he calls the 10th province of our country. I don't know if anyone else has ever come up with that kind of characterization, Dagasondi. But whenever I think about the oceans economy, I always think about you and the 10th province. I'm proud to say that Mr. Sonti is also a member of the Black Management Forum out there, where the oceans economy is about to lead the next wave of growth of our economy in South Africa in Nelson Mandela Bay. And I'm always excited to know that people like him are part of the deliberations that are happening in that branch. He is the chairperson of the Maritime Business Chamber and the secretary of the Nelson Mandela Bay BMF. And he's an alumnus of the BMF's Managerial Leadership Development Program, which some of you may have seen, I think, in the video chat earlier. And he's former Secretary General of NAFCOC of the Nelson Mandela Bay and former Provincial Treasurer General of NAFCOC Youth of the Eastern Cape. Mr. Sonti, over to you, Mhle.
Thank you, Mr. Mngandi, and greetings to everyone who is joining in this webinar today. From my side, one is in appreciation that I'm in this session with two organizations that are currently, carrying out key studies in relations to the activities of the oceans economy. One for Nelson Mandela Bay, but also, nationwide as well. As the previous speakers have alluded to the fact that whilst this conversation is not new, and not only that it is not new, because if we just go back to year 2014, we are also, cutting it in the middle. You would remember that the country played a very, vital role in the oceans economy in terms of the maritime transport. when we even had our own shipping, a line, which was called Submarine. But even that, it's just as well a surface of what oceans economy is in the context of South Africa and Africa, at large, in this global conversation, where we know that even the colonization that has taken place in the African continent was through the same ocean. That tells you in terms of the skill, in terms of the understanding of quite a number of things, South Africa or South Africans or Africans must definitely have, a vast knowledge in that. And maybe our biggest problem would be, and now the likes of Mr. Socikwa, Nabo Snokolo would be best that we are going to be able to document all these things now, in this day and time with the current studies, even though I am not that much of a fan of studies in this day and time, due to the understanding that policies are out there, legislations have been done, and we know where, we know where the real thing is. It's just that there are still those barriers to entry that then limit your SMMEs, in particular, your Black SMMEs that have been historically, disadvantaged to be able to participate in the mainstream of oceans economy. And, as my previous speakers have put it out there to say, when we talk of oceans economy, for many of us, it's as if, we are talking of something that is special, that is out there, that, is not within reach. As Umis, put it to say, around the Nelson Mandela Bay, in fact, around all the coastal cities of this country, including those in the rural areas, you are able to see the ocean. And in some of these areas, you are able also to see one or two vessels passing by. But then you would wonder how many of us that are in close proximity to such that are participating in this space, and what is it? Because it's a ecosystem that has all the economic activities that we know of, which talks to the issues of producing, the issues of supplying, the issues of buying, the issues of of consumption and goods, and of which, for Nelson Mandela Bay or for East London, where it's, these are automotive areas, and which are also high, on manufacturing. For any part that Mercedes-Benz uses in those vehicles, it comes to that port via the ocean. For parts, for all these cars that leave, Utenik, Carriera, to go to the NMB ports to go abroad, some of those components being manufactured by locals, it has everything to do with also with maritime transport. So when we unpack the value chain and including the low-hanging fruits, we don't have to put it as if it's something that is very far-fetched, whereas it's something that for rural communities, fish that they are able to access. But then because of there are laws that govern certain things in terms of the marine living resources, where now you cannot just touch the species that you see in front of you and take and go sell without having gone through certain channels. And some of these things, of which some of the laws and the legislations and the regulations and the policies that have been put in place, some of them are good, just for governance, but you would find that they then become a limit for a new entrance to be able to participate in the space. You would note, Mr. Mngandi, that if we are talking about, the oceans economy, you would note that in certain, where oceans economy has been really embraced, and of which South Africa has not, and in fact the entire African continent has not fully embraced, you would note that where they have really, embraced this oceans economy, you would understand that in countries like, in the US, you would note that oceans economy, through its various sectors, just in sales, for such, countries, it brings about 617 point something billion a year in sales. And then in terms of, in terms of, just in terms of GDP, that is around 347 billion. And of which, even with us, when we were, talking Operation Pakistan, of which now as a program, like Mr. Socikwa said, it's as a methodology, of which now there is something that is, that is being tabled in Parliament, which talks to South Africa's Oceans Economy Master Plan. But then you would note that whilst we are in this 9th year of Operation Pakistan, we said we are hoping that the oceans economy would contribute about 177 billion, and of which, if you look at, into the country's GDP, and if you look at those countries that have already now, if you look at those countries that have already now fully embraced what we planned to say by 2035, for other countries, it's something that, they really make within a period of 2 years. So that tells you the challenge that we are faced with, and how, lobbying and making sure that we push through that there is really, a means that are being done to make sure that there is participation of the majority of this country and of this continent into the space, so that we can start to see the value. We can start, because I am of the opinion, and I firmly believe that what we can, derive from our ocean, we can alleviate the high rate of unemployment in this country. We can at least, do something in addressing that. We may not be able to address it in full, but I know that we can at least do something to address that. And I think that would be what I would put as my opening submission, myself, to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sonti. I always have this interesting challenge. I serve on a national office of the BMF, but sometimes I'm somewhat self-serving in how I find myself in discussions that are biased towards places like the Eastern Cape. And what is always interesting for me is how this particular conversation is so important for what is seen as an impoverished province like the Eastern Cape, in the fact that, in fact, interestingly enough, there's a book where former finance minister Ntate Jonas argues that the Eastern Cape cities should be some of the economic leaders of our economy in South Africa in the next paradigm. And I would argue that sectors like the oceans economy are part of the reason why that is possible. And so it's also quite interesting that a majority of the people here are from that region. So it's something for us to ponder upon in terms of how we think about development, how we decentralize notions of development from pre-existing geographies like the big urban centers of our country that have traditionally been at the helm of economic growth. And I think part of what we must also do here is we must ask the question, isn't it time that sectors like this can leapfrog the Eastern Cape and KZN and anyone else into like the forefront of driving the next wave of growth? Before we move into a kind of interaction with people in the audience and maybe a Q&A, I'd like to ask Umamelo to upgrade to Ati or give him the right to be able to participate and contribute to this discussion. Atenko Sikilane, if you can see him, Mamelo, please bring him into the panel room. And the reason, colleagues, why I'm doing this is that a part of the danger that we sometimes fall into is that a lot of us who automatically latch onto this top-down approach of desktop discussions and all this thinking, and we draw from pie charts and documents that we find online around perspectives of these directions that should be taken. We don't often hear the voice of the lived experience of people who work at what is seen as the grassroots level. And I would hope that this gives Ati a chance to kind of bring us back to earth in our dreaming, and maybe share a few things, perspectives from his own experience in this sector. Mr. Sondi, you can go right ahead. I'm trying to get Mamelo to bring Ati onto the platform.
No, thank you, sir. You may note that what the Maritime Business Chamber represents is exactly those living experiences. The chamber might have grown now to be able to engage at the level of, positioning itself to being the voice of the maritime sector at large, having to be now, we have to have members or stakeholders, as official stakeholders to the chamber at the level of government and your corporates. But the majority of the membership of the chamber still remains, SMMEs, in particular, those that are regarded as new entrances in the space. And I can tell you that even the formation of the chamber itself was as a result of us living those experiences where we were unable to access certain things, in particular, these opportunities, and also the funding that we are talking about, where when you knock, you are told there's about 5 of you that are asking about the same thing. So what do you want us to do? Do you want us to help you and forget about that one? Where we were being used against each other to say, there's many of you, but there's little opportunities out there, so organize yourself. So when we organized ourselves, we then changed the narrative as to say, one, SMMEs are regarded as smash and grab. In particular, your black SMMEs, they are regarded as smash and grab, and of which we changed the narrative to say that's not who we are. The challenges that we were faced, and we are still facing some of them as individual, small businesses, as a collective, through the Maritime Business Chamber, we have been able to address some of those barriers to entry with regards to the issues of Utokolo would know and note that with regards to the issues of licensing. It was up until we went to the level of sitting in the ports consultative committees, and not only sitting there, but also being able to write to, and make our own submissions when the tariff plans were coming through the Ports Regulators Office, when they were releasing the methodologies and all those things, we then, started to write as well to say, these are our inputs and these are the challenges that we are facing on the ground. And that led, to some discounts that we have seen, being effected in that regard for certain licenses, because of all these challenges that we've been having. And it's not that those challenges are not there. some of them, they are still there because I would tell you that there are activities where for you to be able, to do them, you will be told that, like for instance, 1 year, Artie was there as well. 1 year in terms of what is known as bunkering in the city, offshore bunkering. When we started knocking and making noise, we were told, oh, okay, what we are going to do, we are going to institute a study that is going to tell you, whilst we have had an opportunity to deliberate and identify what were the low-hanging fruits. Once we identify the low-hanging fruits, instead of saying now, this is how you access, a study was then commissioned, and the study, instead of the study saying, okay, these are the challenges and this is what we need to do, and this is how, government and can also, or the private sector can play its role in mitigating these things. You know what the study came out to say? The study came out to say, in order for you to be able to supply water into the vessels, in order for you as an SMME to supply water into all these vessels, you need to have N2F level 4 on this, and we are sitting there and we are looking and we are watching, we are like, but we know that one does not even have, these qualifications that you are talking about, but they are supplying. And these are the systems that have been created out there to block, us in participating. But the chamber continues, to lobby and robustly engage, so that all these things that have been put out there, stumbling blocks, finally we get rid of them.
No, Mr. Sonji, thank you so much. And kudos to the work that the chamber is doing. And I think it's always important to understand that we are all allies in this objective. Highly respect the work of the chamber from a BMF perspective, and we're looking to extend bridges to see how our work as BMF can complement your efforts and further enhance them. Fully respectful of the command that you have in that space. And I like what you are saying in that I think that this is why I think it's time to let Artie in, because I think he almost can give us an honest response to some of these sentiments that you are definitely very much fighting for in real terms. Artie, can I hand over to you? You can introduce yourself briefly as part of how you share your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Mnandi, and good evening to you, fellow colleagues. And I'd like to thank this opportunity, to take this opportunity to actually thank you guys for actually organizing this type of discussion, because these are the things that we really need to be aware of at all moments of our careers and also our lives in general, because the importance of the oceans economy can never be understated. So I would like to thank you, colleagues, for allowing us to have this conversation. My name is Atengo Sikilane, and I was born in this city of Gqeberha, and I grew up in the rural areas for the first half of my life. And then I had to come back to Port Elizabeth, to finish my studies and actually experience, my relationship with the oceans. So if you want me to talk about the grassroots experience that I've had insofar as the oceans economy is concerned, I'll start also by just identifying my curiosity at an early age when it comes to the ocean. So I grew up as someone who was doing geography in Eslalini. So when I would come to PE, because PE is a bay, it's Algoa Bay. So there's like an elbow in the land, so that when you're coming from the N2 above Colchester, you can see it's as if the PE is being separated from the ocean, the Somerset side. So for me, when I was growing up, I would think, okay, that is overseas. Maybe that is like Madagascar and stuff like that. But it turned out not to be. So my curiosity didn't only stop there. I found myself in an academic space at Nelson Mandela University. having ventured into sociology, business management, and all these things. Ultimately, I got introduced to the postgrad diploma in maritime studies in 2016, of which I successfully completed. But I was also faced with the challenge of unemployment, just like most of the graduates that emerged from university. So I ended up becoming a fisherman. So that is when my activism, so to speak, really was deepened, because I was not out at sea as a fisherman with no education background. I was there first and foremost to secure a job for myself and my family. But number two, I was there as well as a researcher, so to speak, because I had the background now, the theoretical background. But as I was there, obviously, I saw the gaps and the loopholes in ocean governance, in skills development, in manufacturing, in food processing, and all of those things. So ultimately, I had to dig deep within myself and humble myself enough to actually come and pursue a master's program in maritime studies. So, which is what I'm busy with now at this moment. And while I was employed by SAIMI, I had the opportunity to actually venture into different parts of the country, especially the wild coast of the Eastern Cape, where I was exposed to stacking contrast or extremes, between the rural side of the province and the industrial or coastal side of the province, because there's been so much neglect in the wild coast, or just the East Coast itself, as compared to the other side of the Western Cape, if I can draw those comparisons. But for me, I would like to actually highlight these three important issues, or four, which I believe the colleagues have already covered, from Econ Consulting, BMF itself, the chamber itself, and what my fellow colleague is doing with the work with SAIMI, Mr. Socikwa. So, but my contribution to this discussion would actually to emphasize on these four important points, which I think we are all aware of. Number one would be the awareness program that is being done by SAIMI and by BMF and by the chamber and Econ Consulting as a joint thing. Because I believe that in order for us to actually take interest into this thing, we need to know exactly what is happening. So these type of discussions are important for me in the sense that they give us a sense of what is going on in the oceans economy. So if you create awareness, then people know exactly what you are talking about. And we do not need to have a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach as well, so that we can have emerging views from the lived experiences, both in the coast, in the cities, and in the rural coastal towns or villages that we reside in. Number two would be the capacity aspect of this whole oceans economy, potential unlocking, so to speak. The capacity speaks to the sustainability of the whole project. And lastly, it would be the political will from the political leadership of the country itself. This is how I categorize my contribution. Because we haven't really had, are you with me, Chair? Chair?
Still here, IT, still here, just muted.
Okay.
No, continue.
Yeah, so I was lucky to become part of the research team that did the Eastern Cape Oceans Economy Master Plan that was established in collaboration with the university, Department of Environmental Affairs, and the Eastern Cape Province, as well as EXEC. It dawned on me that actually maybe the approach that we have taken as a country in implementing Operation Phakisa needed a deeper reflection, because Operation Phakisa was adopted obviously from Malaysia, and the political contexts are very different. So how we envision to achieve the goals that we want to achieve would not necessarily come from the same context or format, because these countries that we compare ourselves with honestly differ in how the political landscape is, and also how the economy is. However, it's still not a bad idea to pursue these goals. But I think we are really over ambitious, of which is not something that is very negative, but at least we should be realistic. So number one, I appreciate the work that is being done by all the different entities, especially when it comes to the organizations that we have even in this meeting. So I really appreciate that, because that is exactly the first step, that we need to be organized, to create the awareness, to build the capacity, to ensure that what we do is sustainable, so that it becomes into that you call umchinos chinjai, going forward. And also we need, most importantly, I believe, is the political will from the leadership itself. I'm looking at the IDP from last year, the Nelson Mandela Bay IDP. And this was in last year, May, 24th May. So it's been almost a year now. And there's nowhere near where I see anything talking about aquaculture, coastal tourism, marine manufacturing. There's nothing, there's a gap there there's a gap that's missing about the ocean's economy. So the IDP itself is silent on that. So I think it is the work that we should do as these different entities and organizations, knowing that we are trying to achieve the same goal, regardless of what Operation Pakisa envisions as targets. But at least we should be on that way in actually to try to contribute towards the discourse. So as I was listening, I did pick up that econ consulting is very fundamental. Is very fundamental at the policy development, which is very important, because these are policies that are drafted by people. Sometimes they're not drafted by the people who have the same interest. Maybe we do not have the same skin color that we do. So it is very important that we emerge also in those spaces. So I'm very happy with that work that is being done there to actually influence the policies that shape the ocean's economy. And I remember that story very well, Mr. Sonji, that one of actually going into those meetings at Transnet to actually say, no, this thing is not going to work. For me to actually get a license, I should be registered with this particular association. And if I'm not, then I won't get the opportunity. And I'm happy that you guys were able to win that fight for us as well and the next generation. So number two, when I talk about capacity, obviously we know that we are talking about the skills development aspect of this thing. Now at the grassroots level, if I were to compare the Eastern Cape, the rural coast of the Eastern Cape to any other coast, be it the Western Cape or any other country in the West Africa or East Africa, the differences are quite wide, in the sense that in those other places within Africa itself, in the West Coast, you do get that the locals, they know exactly the type of wood that they need to use to make a makeshift or indigenous boat to go out at sea to fish and come back, right? Whether you go to Tanzania, whether you go to West or Guinea, Ghana, Nigeria, those people know the natural resources within their own surrounds. So this is why I come in. I'm always concerned about the way that our people actually deal with their own environment and the barriers that are there. And these barriers are not necessarily natural barriers. These are things that were created deliberately to actually neglect the wild coast and keep it as pristine, as virgin as possible. And also neglecting the development that should be taking place there, which could also be led by those people residing there. So when I talk about capacity, I'm talking about that aspect of local manufacturing, because we do have TVET colleges like your King Sabata Dalindyebo College. We have quite a number of TVETs. The reason why I'm mentioning KSD is because it is closer to Coffee Bay, and this is where we can bridge we can bridge the two different participants, being the local residents there, and also the stakeholder, that is the TVET itself, so that we can bridge that gap. So when I talk about capacity, I'm talking about the work that is being done by SAIMI itself in driving skills development and capacity building. And when we talk about the sustainability aspect of it, I'm talking about exactly knowing the natural resources that you have. I think we've got quite a number forest. There's a lot of forest industry in the Eastern Cape, but I think the focus has never been on the maritime side of it. But in the Western Cape, you find that they build the best yachts in South Africa, just here down in Knysna Platte or down in the Southern Cape. But there's nothing happening in our side of this province. So I'm always worried about that. And the reason why we haven't seen much change is because there's a lack of political will, which is now the fourth part of my contribution, that in order for you to address development, you need to have strong commitment from the political leadership itself. Yes, we did see that, the previous government that was led by Mr. Jacob Zuma actually did come up with this brainchild, with this thing of Operations Pakisa having been adopted it from Malaysia. However, like I said, the contexts are not the same. Number one, if we talk about the people that are actually in control of the maritime economy itself, those people didn't really have the arrangement that we had as South Africa, the historical segregation that we had in its explicit form. So they are able to participate freely in the economic activities that are taking place in their own country. Whereas if you come to PE, I can tell you now, if I can go to PE right now and try to fish because I don't have food to eat today, and I happen to be lucky and catch 4 or 5 fish, I might be criminalized, so to speak, due to these policies that are in place. Whereas in those other parts of the world, they have free access to the ocean in a sustainable manner. They might not be as advanced as us when it comes to the infrastructure that is there, but their day-to-day economic realities is better than ours in the sense that they do not have the fear of being criminalized. So it's not only the fishing aspect of the ocean's economy that I'm referring to, but I'm talking about other aspects as well, like your manufacturing, your tourism, and so forth. So whenever there's a Iron Man, you'd hardly find us benefiting directly there. But this is not to complain, so to speak, but it's also to highlight the different low-hanging fruits that are there, because I'm also a person who is solution-driven, in the sense that if you identify a problem, then let's work towards that and actually draw up a solution. So when you have places like or events like your Ironman, or when they label Gqeberha as the water sports capital of South Africa, what does it say about the level of economic activities and the intensity thereof, and the participation of these people that we come from, and the community that we come from? What is our participation in those type of events? And are these the only events that we can rely upon when it comes to coastal tourism? Because these are traditional events, so to speak, that have been there before our awareness about this whole thing. So are we only limiting ourselves to those activities as labor or as entrepreneurs? Because now we are talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about active participation. We are not talking about economic castration like we have been used to in these other subsectors or other industries. This one is the one that we cannot miss, because we've been there already as labor reserve, and so forth. So I want to draw our attention towards those type of solutions that we have, because within us right now, we have the Maritime Business Chamber, we have the consulting company, which is also Black woman owned, which is very good. And also we have an organization that is doing a very significant study for SAIMI as well. So those are the things that we can identify. For instance, within the policy of the same TP that Sis Notol was talking about, the comprehensive maritime transport policy, there's an aspect there. It's an 8-pointer. It talks about cabotage. Cabotage is strictly the transportation of goods from one coast to the other using only South African vessels. But as far as the reality of that is concerned and our participation therein, I am not 100% sure as to how much we really contribute to that, because Mr. Soni just highlighted that we had submarine as a shipping line yalapha South Africa. But obviously, when we talk about cabotage, we're talking about a coast-to-coast arrangement, a coast-to-coast transportation of goods and people within our own coastal waters as a country. So this then means that we need to have ojikeleza izikepe that are ubering cargo from Cape Town to Durban, Durban to Ngqura, and so forth. So these are the things that we need to look into, so that we are able to even put those things into these IDPs that we have. So all of it is going to need our level of commitment, as we have seen that we're actually breaking grounds in this space. So I do not really want to dwell much, but I wanted to highlight these 4 important aspects: awareness, capacity building, the sustainability of this oceans economy, and the political will. The reason why I'm talking about the political will as well is because I'm trying to draw parallels between South Africa, Malaysia, China, and all these other ones. Now, recently, the CCP in China recently, they were actually trying to draft, their own national development plan. So everyone was participating from the ground up, but now the implementation was coming from top down, which is basically they're aware of what is happening on the ground, and at a higher level, they know exactly what to do to implement this. How do they implement such? In a city like Xiamen, they do make sure that you have your own, this is why I'm talking about the political context, which is different, and of which this whole Operation Pakisa was adopted. In there, they have regional banks, right? So if the regional bank, the Bank of the Eastern Cape, then you have the Bank of Gqeberha. Within the Bank of Gqeberha, then you have each sector having its own bank. So you have the industrial bank, the agricultural bank, and marriage. So finance is very important in this whole thing, because we can have all these ideas, we can input into policy, we can, we can do all of these things, but number one, very important, financing the activities that we need. So the political will then speaks to that as well, in the sense that not only are we driven to drive the unlocking of the oceans economy, but we also have the financial muscle to make sure that this thing becomes a reality. But then how do you draw these different financial resources? How do you mobilize these resources to make sure that you mobilize and implement these things? Then we also need to become very careful when it comes to that, because if we are not careful about the people that are financing us, then it becomes a problem actually trying to implement what we're trying to implement. So we need to look at financing aspect of these things. So if I want to say I want to open up a maritime department at KSD, where am I going to get that money to establish that? It becomes very important. So these are the things I would like to actually for us to reflect upon, because we are doing this thing, but the rate upon which we are doing it has been slow, not because we are not willing and we are not doing the work, but it's only a small group of us who are actually aware of what is going on. So we need to drive more of these conversations into these coastal rural towns, into the townships as well, because the labor force that is doing all of these things, they come from the townships, they come from the rural areas, but they have they lack the theoretical framework or how this whole thing is designed, how the whole system is designed, because always the emphasis is on securing jobs, not talking about how to strategically overhaul and position ourselves into the forefront of this oceans economy. So, Chair, for me, that would be my contribution, having grown up in a coastal city, having grown up in a rural town, or in a rural village, and also now being at a higher education institution. So I feel that we can fill in these gaps by actually doing more, because it says that the reward for more work is actually, the reward for good work is more work. So the good work that has been done by Usisinoksi, Unati, Socio-Economic, and all these other entities, the reward for that is actually more work, because now we have to work more harder to achieve these goals. So for me, I would like to make that contribution in the sense that we need to have emphasize capacity building, sustainability, and the political will, so that we can ensure that we do have the resources that we need to finance the project going forward. Because 2033 is around the corner, and I don't see us achieving those targets. But it's not about those targets, it's about our own involvement and will. So that would be my contribution, Chair, at this point.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ati, for that cross-cutting contribution. That's exactly what I was hoping we would achieve and more. I'm going to try and bring Lwandile in if he's got any pointers he wants to make before we sort of welcome the contributions from the attendees. I'm seeing questions already in the chatter, and I've noted Bridget's hand, which we will deal with later in the sequence of the contributions that have been made. I don't know, Mr. Socikwa, do you have any input before we open for Q&A and perhaps draw to?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, what I will do as I comment, I'll take the first question because I noted it earlier. The others have just come in now. So maybe as an opening comment would be to deal with that question, and I link it to some of the inputs that have been made by the colleagues around the whole notion about the obliviosity of people towards Operation Pakistan vis-a-vis our thoughts around the Oceans Economy Master Plan. So where I'm sitting, and from my own experience, lived experience as well, having gone through the Oceans Economy Master Plan, I don't see these two being mutually exclusive to an extent that we need to be able to start a conversation to say that we choose one over the other. The reason why is that if you look at the Oceans Economy Master Plan, it is about revival and growth of the subsectors in the oceans economy at a particular time that we've traversed as a country. That's the point of departure that we should have the conversation laid on. But also, we need to go back and understand that does Operation Pakistan respond to the entire oceans economy? No, it doesn't. It has never been a tool that was ever intended to respond to the entire oceans economy. However, it identified critical subsectors of the oceans economy, which it intended to be able to fast track those in implementation to inculcate and fast track economic growth and create opportunities for employment, SMMEs, and ultimately contribute to the targets of the NDP. If we understand it in that context, we would never then make this comparison to say that the Oceans Economy Master Plan therefore becomes a replacement of Operation Pakistan. That should not be the thinking. Because I think I did say initially, Chair, that the BFR methodology as a principle, you go, I think one of the speakers mentioned around the context. I like that, I think it was to make the context, to say the context totally were different, and even I agree here, the contexts are very different. One thing I may say in that comment is that, in my view, we were not ready institutionally to be able to take or to be off-takers of Operation Pakistan and implement it to its successful logical conclusion for three reasons. One, from a government setup in terms of institutional arrangements, and also informed by the political will, we're never ready for that. Two, the key drivers being the big business or big multinationals, and also the people who really control the larger stakes in the sector. We're not playing the same, well, if I were to say, we're not cooperating to the desired expectation. And that is largely because of how our economic is structured as a country. So I'm not going to go into those politics now. But what I also want to comment on, Chair, which is quite important, is around the whole issue that was raised initially by Babu Sonti, to say we need to be able to stop making this work become that which would become a file 13 with the lack of a better word in a government department or a government institution. And how do you do that? You are able to ensure that the work that we do with these institutions, you bring life to it by involving stakeholders such as the BMF, such as the SMMEs that are speaking here today, but to be aware with the awareness that was being mentioned, so that they understand that they have a responsibility as and when these studies are coming out, they are able to interrogate them and have inputs to an extent that when it comes to policy formulation, they would have had the influence for the policy to take a particular direction. And that direction needs to then be safeguarded. It doesn't only just end, and we can't then say, okay, the government must just be the one that implements. We need to safeguard that direction, because at the end of the day, it serves the interest of us as SMMEs, but also it serves the interest of what we want to achieve in the oceans economy. So to me, I see this as a journey that is starting to say, yeah, we are with a lack of a better, so in privileged positions where we are getting an opportunity to conduct the studies, which conventionally and historically we were never entrusted. I think it's another victory, to say that previously we know that who these studies were entrusted to. So this type of studies now are also entrusted as Black SMMEs who are participating in the space, who want to contribute towards the development of and growth and opportunities for the sector. So definitely I would want to encourage the colleagues to be able to look at it in that context. It's an invitation that is out of genuine understanding to say that those that are actually having lived experiences would have a valuable contribution to make. So, Chair, that is the first opening remark that I wanted to make. Now, coming to some of the content issues which I wanted to deal with, which are quite important. There was a conversation around low-hanging fruits. While I'm not going to go into the details of that now, but I think it's important for us to be able just to reflect at a high level. An example in case, Chair, around low-hanging fruits. I think I did speak about it initially to say we need to ask ourselves a question. When we look at, for example, small harbor and coastline development, say it's one of the newer thinking in the oceans economy evolution in terms of policy development and so forth. What does that opportunity create? It brings about two things. One, it brings about opportunities for the real estate sector to come in, to participate in that value chain. Brings about the construction sector to come in and participate. But it also brings about a whole area of opportunities when it comes to port infrastructure and harbor developments for artisanal development programs and many other opportunities that are there. Then the question is that how do you then harness those opportunities? How do you create a safe landing for SMMEs to be able to be the immediate beneficiaries for those opportunities? It is through this policy direction of being able to change certain things. For example, I just want to talk about there's a lot of investment that is being done around port infrastructure. Thinking out loud, what would really stop the SMMEs to be able to say, let us be able to mobilize and inform policy to really have a stake wherein in all infrastructure port development that is happening, SMMEs should be able to get their own stake. Also, Chair, another one that I think is important to look at, just mentioning randomly, Chair, because there's many renewable energy. Now, we can't all own boats. We can't all build boats. We can't all build vessels. But what is our understanding of renewable energy as it relates to supporting the ocean economy? Particularly understanding that there's a lot of thinking around even alternative forms of energy for the country. So these are some of the things that we want to actually navigate. And what are some of the challenges? We know that that is a high capital intensive space. How do you then create an opportunity for new entrants to be able to come in? and how does that value chain look like? These are some of the things that we're looking at. Also, you speak of communication. Communications in the space cannot only be reduced to radio and equipment services that are used for ship to shore and offshore communication. There are all other communication tools. These are enablers of the primary activities. And I'm relating to this because not everyone that would want to participate in the oceans economy wants to be a fisher. Not everyone that wants to participate in the oceans economy wants to own a vessel. But it may well be that with their accumulation of experience in the sector and their own innovation, they may want to be able to explore other avenues that they will still keep them participating in the space without necessarily focusing on the primary functions. Also, Chair, another one just before I move, which is quite important. If we look at marine manufacturing, for example, we've just only scratched the surface as it relates to that. Because when we look at marine manufacturing, one of the speakers is quite correct to say the high level of requirements that get to be put, they make it so much sophisticated to an extent that it's something that is out of the ordinary, which is not true. For instance, experience teaches us that most of the people that would be off-takers of marine manufacturing activities are people who have worked in the space or people who have actually participated somehow in the core primary functions of the space. Then the question becomes, how do you, have we ever institutionalized and systemized an approach to assist SMMEs to gain skills and exposure? If you speak of new entrants, how do you then are able to support? I think it then brings in the question of capacity building that was mentioned. Another one around that again is to say, how do we start to look at the current vehicles of practice that make provisions for stricter supplier development contributions in this development of ports that are happening, but also in the entire marine manufacturing value chain. Because if you look at it now, how do you create and elevate a market to an extent that this notion that suggests that the market is too small to actually start to cultivate, start to manufacture locally as opposed to relying on abroad? What other opportunities are out there? I think one of the speakers did mention something that is very key, leveraging of skills that are being produced through partnerships with SAIMI and also TVET colleges, but it also doesn't end there. How do you then participate in other aspects of the value chain whilst you are still being able to do that? Because there's also distribution, there's sales, there's all of that, which at this point in time is a low-hanging fruit. While we know that there's a longer term of being able to want to establish manufacturing locally and so forth, but what then becomes the participations of SMMEs now? So those are some of the things that definitely we are looking at interrogating and being able to provide suggestions, Chair, around that. Lastly, on my side, I think for now, because I'm worried about time for everyone, I think you mentioned the issue of political will. I want to marry the political will with also some of the environmental concerns, bringing in now offshore oil and gas, for instance. So at this point in time, we know that about 10 to 15 years ago, there were identified spaces of offshore oil and gas explorations by multinationals, big conglomerates and so forth in the space. And the question then becomes, how do you then create an opportunity in that value chain for these SMMEs to participate? One, when it comes to them informing and supporting the research work that is done to inform policy at the level of MPG, which is Marine Protected Ocean Areas and Governance. That's the first part, because when they are able to contribute there, you are able to then see a different look and different feel in terms of what policy says. But then again, in the explorations that are happening there, how do you then create further opportunities for them? Because it can't be that we know that the seismic studies and surveys that are currently in court, at some point, they will open up. And as they open up, are you going to allow only Total Energies and all the others? I'm just mentioning them because they are at the top of my head, to be the only ones to participate in the space. How do you bring in SMMEs who are already there but do not have the know-how? So those are some of the things that we want to look at. I know that there's many others, some of the colleagues that have spoken about. I don't want to talk about them because they've already mentioned them. There's no point in me actually reiterating and the same thing that they've said. So I think, Chair, for now, I'll leave it there. It's just to provoke thinking and people to see our line of thought and where we're going with this study. What are some of the things that we would want to see being key? Awareness is very important. I think you're quite correct. I personally do not believe that we have awareness about the ocean's economy, its value chain, and its subsectors together with the opportunities that lie upstream and downstream in all the sectors. It is just only still reduced in the main to those that are close to the coastal towns, whereas when we speak of oceans economy, we go even as far as inland aquaculture. How do you then navigate and explore those and bring in the SMME? So it's a huge task, and I think one we are excited to really drive and partner with many stakeholders here and even outside of this platform, and create conversations that really would allow us to have a meaningful and impactful outcome of the process. And then, as they say, the proof would be in the eating of the pudding. So we can do all the great work, but ultimately the work must be implemented. Thanks.
No, thanks, Chair. I mean, the proof must be in the pudding. Taking me back to Artie's comment about Jikeleza. You know, there's a place here near where I live called Wild Coast Jikeleza. I'm thinking of starting a business called Wild Coast Jikeleza, with a series of Jikelezas on the ocean. There's nothing more fascinating to my life than something in the Netherlands they call a water taxi. I still can't recover from that. Colleagues, we're going to move to the Q&A, and I think Lwandile has dealt with Pedro's first comment and around the Oceans Economy Master Plan, and I think I did try and share something around it here. I think there is still not a lot of awareness, and I think from where we are, Pedro, if I can say, I think our attempt here is to get some kind of engagement going around this, and we see this as an emerging sector. We don't have a totality view of what's possible and what is impossible, but we also are aware of the fact that the kinds of engagements that are happening in many different spaces, and sometimes they are fragmented, and as is the case with many other conversations in the country. And this is our own attempt to try and build a community that can really contribute to development. You know, I think this whole notion of opportunity sometimes is also just built on, you know, resources that exist. But we must also, as Artie was pointing out earlier, these kind of cross linkages, cross sectors that we need to start mapping out, and only through these engagements and the ideation that comes from them will we be able to see those pathways. Bridget, I don't know if you wanted to say something, but I do understand that you were kind of greeting us, and thank you for joining us all the way from Mitchell's Plain. I think this is fascinating for us in the BMF. We do have a chapter in the Western Cape, but I mean to kind of have your participation for this subject is quite enriching. So I don't know if there's something you wanted to add or not, but colleagues, if there are any other questions, I will acknowledge a show of hands. And then I suppose that I should pose this back to the panelists, and I'll read both questions, right? So the first one is from Pedro again. And I think this is the ecosystem's perspective, if I'm correct. The bulk of South Africa marine resources are currently optimally utilized. This is in the form of a fishing rights allocation process, which ties up these resources for 8 to 15 years. The economic viability of the small-scale fishing policies hangs in the balance as a result of limited marine resources available to small-scale fisheries cooperatives. Aquaculture is being mooted as an alternative livelihood by various sectors, including small-scale fishers, abalone rights holders, and other disciplines who are part of the ocean's economy. We are creating unrealistic expectations across a variety of sectors without each knowing about the other. And I think I'm not going to answer the question, but I'm going to attempt to say that's exactly the point, is we must kind of lift the veil on these chats so that the realism comes to the forefront, and then we can see what's possible. And then before I'm going to give the panelists to answer or to respond to Pedro's comment, I think I must add the other question as well. Normally Port. Hello, my name is Mali. I'm from Southern Ocean Training Academy with progression of Operation Pakisa. How much of it is hindered by political interference? And is there a way of isolating it from much of political influence? Also, I would like to share a comment if possible. Colleagues, can you maybe, are there any takers? Noxie, Sonti, Ati, if you want to go at some of these questions?
Okay, maybe if I may start, you know, the oceans economic conversation is very broad, and I think Pedro is one of key fishing industry, you know, role players. He is on the grassroots. They are busy right now with grassroots, you know, engagements. He's been involved in the fishing sector. So all those things that he's writing there about, it's things that he knows very well. And the conversation just being oceans economy, the way, you know, it's so broad, probably in the near future, we would need maybe, you know, to break it down into, you know, the different industries so that we are able to capture, you know, those specific people that we would want to really be talking to in this regard. You would note the fisheries and aquaculture conversation in the country is a very, you know, serious and one of those conversations that you would really want to address it very well. Same as the issue with regards to offshore oil and gas exploration. Like Mr. Socio-Economic was mentioning, once we have all these opportunities in the country with regards to, you know, the resources that we have in terms of the offshore oil and gas, that can also assist, you know, to elevate poverty in this country. But you have, you know, other sectors that may be affected if, you know, when you talk of the issues of seismic surveys and everything else, if we don't really have a proper conversation between, you know, your fishing sector and the oil and gas, and conducting those proper, you know, awarenesses, so that each, you know, understands the other, and how all of these, you know, can all coexist. And I think that conversation is out there. Then with regards to Operation Pakisa, you know, I am always reluctant, you know, to engage more in the Operation Pakisa conversation. And my comment is just always to say, maybe for some, you know, you would understand why someone would say it's a wish list. You would understand for some to say it was just a program. You know, you would understand why for some they would just say it was just a political statement, you know, in the issue of Operation Pakis. Be that may as it be, where we currently stand with it, you would note that majority of, like as explained by Usis Poshia, to say majority of those activities that were being pushed through Operation Pakisa, they were not new, you know, activities that were supposed to be happening. But it was more of to say, how do we fast track, you know, the issues of port development, infrastructure, and all these things. So that's why some of these things have just fallen through with no one who's really following up on the issues of, you know, small harbor development. So there's quite a number of, you know, of all of those things, and I don't think it has got anything, you know, that has to do with political interference. But I just think the initial, you know, formation of the program. That's why I'm with Ati when he, you know, when he says when we launch some of these initiatives, some of them are just copy and paste, and some of them is just someone wanting to say, we can get through this, quickly, and then we are able to move to the next. But yeah, it's a conversation that we can have, another day. But I think I've responded, and for a future conversation, even with ourselves, Ocean Econ or Socio-Economic, the likes of Pedro would be, some people that you would want to have when you want to engage around the issues of, fishing and, fisheries and aquaculture. Thank you.
No, thanks, Mr. Sondi. It sounds to me like you're saying that Pakistan was effectively largely undefined, and so people couldn't adopt it because it wasn't really a program in that sense. Colleagues, may I also just remind us to please rely on the chat and follow the link to the database that we would like you to complete so that we can further this discussion in line with the work of the study. Thanks. Noxie, I've noted you, Bridget. I'll give you a chance. Noxie?
Thank you so much.
Mamelo, in the meantime, Mamelo, can you allow Bridget into the room just so that she can be able to speak? Thanks, Noxie.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I'm just going to try to share my screen quickly just to answer Pedro's question. If it will allow me. Okay, colleagues. This was actually a presentation that we did last year at the World Maritime Day parallel event organized for the International Maritime Organization, IMO. And it really signifies the conversation that we're actually having today, that development in the oceans economy, and this is lessons learned that from the project that we did at Alfonso, which is a rural community in the Eastern Cape that is next to the Wild Coast. And part of what we were talking about is that development needs to be on a bottom-up approach. And Pedro has actually talked about it, and something that I've been saying over the years, and I really agree with you, Pedro, in saying, is that when we talk about oceans economy and the opportunities in the oceans economy space, the first thing that officials like to do is to point participants into the fishing sector. Number one, the lessons that we've learned from the Alfonso district is that most of the coastline by the Alfonso district is actually earmarked as a marine protected area. So marine protected area says that Department of Fisheries has closed off that area because they feel that the species are endangered. Number one, we found that the officials of that area were not notified when that was declared a marine protected area. Fishermen in that area are unable to fish, and therefore they need to go into the Wild Coast. Then they take those resources, but they're not counted as resources of the KZN. And that's not doing much justice to the fishing sector of the Eastern Cape. So what we were suggesting as Ocean Econ is that when we're looking at the new Oceans Economy Master Plan, we need to, because Operation Pakistan was a pilot project, and now we're going into the real implementation, driving for the targets of 2033. What we need to look at is the methodology of Operation Pakistan. We need to look at a methodology that looks into the social equity, environmental sustainability, and economic viability. But in doing so, we need to look at the resource availability. And I agree with you, Pedro, but the message that is being driven is that fishermen should look at opportunities in aquaculture. Now, my personal views on aquaculture is that if you look at the aquaculture projects that have been started in the Eastern Cape, most of them have failed. And why have they failed? It's because of the infrastructure is not there. Number two, we do not have the climate that is needed for aquaculture. Number three, the resources. We do not have the resource to support these established or emerging aquaculture farms that are coming out in the Eastern Cape. We had one in Nelson Mandela Bay. That infrastructure is still in place, but it did not do well, and we need to ask ourselves why. We have a massive aquaculture in KZN that did not do well, and we need to ask ourselves why. The South African climate, and also when we're doing this, we need to look at, like you said, the resource availability. We've got a number of fish stocks to support the demand of the South African economy. Is there greater demand for us to move into aquaculture? I don't think so. And therefore, I don't feel that we need to start pushing fishermen into aquaculture. The environmentalists might not agree with me to ensure that we need sustainability in the future, but I feel that the fish stocks that we have in South Africa are sufficient for locals and to grow the export market. So this is the methodology that we, if you can see my screen, looking at the different resource availability and the blue economy capacity that we want to support. And then you also mentioned there was a question on, is political interference inhibiting the development of the oceans economy? My personal view is, to a certain degree, it is. Number one, to be said, the political will is there to drive the oceans economy mandate. But because of the change in leadership, and I think IT articulated this very well when he started off, is that so many people perceive Operation Pakis and the oceans economy as a project of the former president. And therefore, with the change in leadership, there's been a change in perception. It is seen as pushing an agenda that is pushed by the previous leadership, but it is not. We've seen a number of departments still spearheading the Operation Pakisa, but is political will there? Political will is there to a certain degree. Is it inhibiting the development of Operation Pakisa? Yes, it does. And also on official, also on the local basis. Ati said something very important when he was opening. He said he looked at the IDP of Nelson Mandela Bay and did not see any oceans economy projects or drivers to develop the oceans economy of Nelson Mandela Bay. Being a city with 2 ports, with a coastline, and all the other activities that also Mr. Sondi has pointed out, but it's not forming part of their IDP. Secondly to that, the city itself sits on the maritime cluster, which encompasses, I think, TNPA, the city, emerging business, and all other stakeholders that are involved in the maritime industry. But we still ask ourselves, why are those projects not featuring? Mr. Socikwa also mentioned that we have the Eastern Cape Oceans Economy Master Plan. That master plan breaks down on the particular project that must happen at the different municipalities and local municipalities. But then we're not finding those projects being featured on the IDP. Therefore, if we look at, say, the political interference, maybe that could be the cause, or maybe we find that province is not speaking to the local municipality. Because that project, the development of the master plan was developed through and adopted by the Premier's office. And we hope that it would localize. What we really appreciated about the Alfonso, they recognize themselves as a local district municipality in the coastline, and they've set out and being intentional in transforming the oceans economy sector, wanting to identify the opportunities that are there and what needs to be done. And like I said, the problem is basically in policy. So this was what part of our recommendations into the use of ocean accounting and marine spatial planning, is that we need policy relevant indicators to actually put the transformation agenda. Today, we're talking about transformation and the opportunities for new entrants in the oceans economy space. We need policy directives and indicators that informs policy targets and the data that is there. And this is why the study from Socikwa is very important. That will give us the data of the emerging businesses that are in the sector, also the participants that want to enter the sector and where they want to play. And if we want to call in the different departments, like the Department of Small Business, I think I had a conversation with the Minister's office at some point, and they were saying, we don't know what opportunities we can give, on what support we can give small businesses to actually play in the oceans economy space. So if at that high level that the Department of Small Business is not sure of what opportunities, of what support that they can give small businesses, it means that we have clearly not defined the value chain and the policy directives are not there. If we had the political will, we'd have the policies in place. I remember engaging with one of the MECs in the Eastern Cape, asking him why they're not implementing certain policies, certain projects of Operation Pakisa. And their answer was that the policy directive is not there. The mandate is not there from higher up. And therefore, if they go against the mandate that is not there, they won't form a part of the APP. And therefore, that's where we find ourselves, is that I don't feel like the transformation is stagnant. It like I support Ati when he's saying the political will is not there. And what can we do? And the question was, what can we do to ensure that there's no interference with political will? And it goes back to policy again. And I'm sorry if I feel like I'm talking about policy a lot. But if we put things into legislation and we put the directives in there, with the change in politics, with the change in leadership, we'll start to see projects going on, because the directive is there, the mandate is there. Whoever is into power that particular time will ensure that the mandate continues and the directives are continued. I hope I answered your question, Pedro, but I really agree with you. We talk about projects and we talk about and we give out fishing licenses and that is part of what government assumes is the low-hanging fruits when talking about the oceans economy. But in giving out licenses, we also need to give out boats. You also need to support emerging fisheries and to also complete the value chain. So if I'm saying I'm supporting fishermen from Nelson Mandela Bay, I need to ensure they have storage facilities. I need to ensure they have a vessel that they can use. I need to ensure that they are properly trained and they have the proper licenses and to go out at sea, the STCW. Those training costs are costly, and government needs to support emerging fisheries. So, and for them to play in that space, we can't just give fishermen licenses. We need to go beyond that. We need to be intentional of the transformation that we're having in the space. And also in driving the transformation agenda, we need to be clear of that in giving out these licenses, we can only give out certain licenses to and cap it at let's say 50 or, okay, 50 is hypothetical, but cap the licenses so that the resource allocated there supports the emerging businesses and the existing businesses. Not to say that we are just providing opportunities for people, knowing that the next 3 or 4 years, we won't have the same fish stocks in Nelson Mandela Bay as we had today because of the depletion and the demand and the over congested of the space itself. So we need to be intentional. We need to map out these opportunities. When we're talking about opportunities in the Eastern Cape, we need to be clear how many entrants can play in that space and how we can support those entrants. And just in closing, there was a conversation and we need to map out the oceans economy and the relevant legislation to determine the participation of SMMEs. I'm glad that we're having this conversation today, and I'm glad that BMF is driving the conversation today. The reason that we have development in the agricultural space is because Black businesses come together and has pushed the agenda for transformation. And the reason why we have Black players in the mining space is that they have changed the legislation and they've been intentional with the transformation that has taken place. The oceans economy has been there for years. It's not a new market. It's not an emerging market. We call it an emerging market because some of us have just heard about it. But what I want to say is that we need to be intentional also with the message that we are saying. I love what Pedro is saying, is that we're driving a lot of people into aquaculture, not telling them how aquaculture has failed, and even big business has failed in aquaculture. We need to be intentional with the transformation that we're saying, and also we need the policy directives. Thank you so much, Chair. I hope Pedro I've answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I think there are strong points coming out around this issue of the IDP participation from us and from a lot of other broad sector of our society feeding into the governance process. And I think it answers the question that Thando Polo has posed around how to get the political leadership to understand the oceans economy. I think we need to find ourselves at that level of the IDPs. And I think you've contributed a rich perspective into how these flows and linkages that need to be ironed out in terms of understanding the entire ecosystem. And my suspicious mind is always mindful of this whole marine protection space versus market protectionism in a country like ours, when you talk about the ecosystem's perspective around stocks availabilities in places like the Eastern Cape and others. Okay, I think let's allow, because I think we need to draw to a close as well, let's allow Bridget to make a contribution before I allow Ati to have the final bite.
Everybody, thank you for the invite. I don't know where the invite came from, but I came into the meeting late. My mistake, my hand went onto the chat, so I didn't really have a question. Okay. But yes, I've listened to the conversation, and I've noted since 2013, we've been talking about Operation Pakisa. It comes now to marine spatial planning. And if we look at it, there's the same thing happening where there's a lot of loopholes when it comes to the ocean governance. Because I've been working, like Pedro, myself, I've been working on the ground regarding different aspects in the ocean where the small-scale fishes can patch into. Now, then I myself realize now, how will the people be part of the ocean economy when they are excluded? Because every department that's responsible for ocean economy, marine spatial planning, in their own silos. They now came back to Western Cape again to say small harbor, big harbor development. Since 2013, we started with Operation Pakisa, starting with small harbor, big harbor development. It started in KwaZulu-Natal, started in PE. My eyes was all over that. Now, eventually, it's supposed to come back to Western Cape again, then immediately something was stopped. So if you look at yourself staying nearby harbors, how will you really interact when you're not allowed to work on that harbors, not to have business on that harbors? How can the red tape be taken away and just look at the person, what they've been doing all the years, how their business is running? Will you allow them or still keep them outside? Because remember here, sitting in a country where the big bosses are still running our country, and we cannot deny that. We can never deny that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about, but time consuming now. I came in late to the meeting, so not taking the whole platform. I will say thank you very much for giving me my small cent in the basket.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bridget. I've noticed Mr. Mtengwana from Karieja, whose school is offering marine science in grade 12 this year. It's the first school in the Eastern Cape. What can we do to get support from you? Let's get in touch with Mr. Mtengwana, colleagues, people like Noxie, Mr. Sonti. Let's get in touch with him and see how we can further that discussion, especially around the fact that we're having a discussion here about an ecosystem that's going to create a landing strip for the learners he is teaching. Thank you. Ati, let me give you one bite because I think you were the one person who had a hand up who hadn't spoken.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I really appreciate the the level of commitments towards institutionalization of our efforts towards making like a breakthrough into this space. Because if we are disorganized, then obviously we cannot push as a unit. So I really appreciate the work that has been done by the various stakeholders and also BMF itself. For me, there was a question about the political will and how do these people make or how do we make the political leaders aware of the goals of the oceans economy. I think in the next few weeks, SAIMI will be having a workshop with the traditional leadership and local leaders in the Wild Coast. I cannot be specific as to which part of town or which town it is, but so you do have entities like SAIMI and other important stakeholders as well doing this work of trying to create the awareness. But I mean, when we talk about the political will itself, we're talking about the discussions that are happening at the branch level. So I do not know how much progress we have made in that space, because I'm assuming quite a few of us here are not really into partisan politics. That is just an assumption that I'm making, given the fact that we are running different organizations. So I think that conversation can trickle down to the the grassroots level, so that even when people aspire to be political leaders, at least they are aware that there's quite a number of opportunities and a lot of work that needs to be done, in the oceans economy. So the institutionalization aspect of it, I really appreciate, because we have made breakthrough. I mean, you can hear from the presentations yourself, Chair, that there's been momentum that has been gathered. And I think lastly, colleagues, for now, as far as Operation Pagisa is concerned, I think we should not really stress so much about the goals that are there. I think it is up to the government to worry about that. I think as individual stakeholders and organizations and even entrepreneurs as well, I think our effort should be focused on actually making the tangible change that we can make as soon as possible, like you have done already, with the different entrepreneurs within the space, as well as the organizations within the space. So I would like to appreciate that point, the fact that we are able to organize ourselves and mobilize ourselves. And lastly, as a suggestion, if it ever becomes a thing for us to actually mobilize resources, I think I keep on stressing this maybe in my own private circles, that maybe, instead of the traditional financial institutions that we always rely upon to achieve these goals, we must be aware of the fact that we will meet resistance, just as the Maritime Business Chamber met resistance when they were trying to get licensing for Black organizations or Black companies. We will meet resistance. So when it comes to financing, I believe we should look into the diaspora, be it the African diaspora. We can look within Africa itself. We can even look within our own selves, because we are able to build institutions with or without major financial contributions from the traditional financial institutions, so that sooner or later will not become captured and become popular for the wrong reasons. So I just wanted to highlight that thing, that I really appreciate the institutionalization, and we should also pay attention to the financing of the projects itself, and the political will has to trickle down, and it must have a ripple effect towards the branch level as well, so that people emerge in political spaces very quickly. So there must always be that effort. As who will make that effort, it depends upon ourselves by creating these awareness programs, so that whoever is there is participating, they can have a takeaway home point. So that would be my contribution as I sit down, Chair. Thank you.
No, thanks, IT. And Pedro, I have responded to your question it's always fascinating that people are always worried about this perspective of whether BMF is inclusive of race groups who are defined as Black. I think our stance always is that if you're committed to developing managerial leadership and driving socio-economic transformation, which I think are things that will make South Africa better, you have every right to enroll as a member and make a contribution. Mr. Swint?
No, thank you, sir. I just wanted to respond to, the issue of political will. Just to say, whilst, we've got a vibrant Minister of Transport, whom she's been a deputy minister, I think, for about 12 years. And she has, been playing a vital role in reviving, maritime in South Africa. But the reality, whilst we talk about all these things, what Ati raised to say with regards to political activities as well, you would note that, when we talk about the IDP with regards to, and I didn't want to make this about the Eastern Cape because the conversation is just national, and it so happened that majority of us are from the Eastern Cape in this conversation. But what is very key here is understanding that how the landscape, in terms of governance and the political landscape in this country works. Everything is around the voter, and oceans economy at this stage is not seen as one of those sectors that can bring you, the voters. Hence, you would want to, whatever that you do, you drive all these other sectors that can bring you the masses. And that's what you would want to do. So you would want those sectors that will bring you the masses. Hence, you don't really see that much, of what we see, what we say, not really, of a political will. Because we engage at different, because we engage at different levels, I still feel, South Africa has not really taken up, its position with regards to the opportunities that reside with the entire, oceanic region economy in this country. And that definitely, you see it when you look at other countries, at what they have done, where whatever that is being done, at the national level, it trickles down to your local municipality, and of which we have not done that. And this is one of the things that we've been advocating for as the chamber, to say maybe at some point in time, when we are really serious about this conversation of maritime, we would require a maritime ministry, maritime shipping, maritime and shipping ministry that would really focus us on capturing this great opportunity that resides in our shores. You would note the functions currently, they reside with Department of Transport, together with its agencies. It resides with fisheries and environment. It resides with also, public enterprise, Department of Public Enterprise, as with the ports as well. So all of those things that tells you that we have not really, driven the right direction in this regard. Thank you. We would apologize.
You're eating into Junior's time, Mr. Soni. That's why. They can tell that you are eating into their time now. Your meeting should have ended long time ago. No, thanks. I think I must hand over to Mr. Socikwa to say thanks and close us off.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm glad that the two questions I wanted to respond to have quite, I believe, comprehensively been responded to. I totally agree with the fishing, the response on fisheries, in as far as the narrow thinking that we sometimes get to be driven to when it comes to opportunities in that subsector. So I don't need to actually add more there. And then around the issue of institutionalization or lack thereof as it relates to the political will that perhaps would be the key driver. That I think it's something that again I would want to say that we would always want to try by all means to mobilize and lobby our politicians and leaders to really take up ownership of the work that we do in the oceans economy. So again, there, I said it earlier, the proof is really ultimate in the eating of the pudding. So it remains like that. And for as long as you have a nation that does not want to pull together in terms of being able to want to make significant change and impact in any economic landscape of the country, will always have challenges. And it starts with political will, by the way. And it goes on and on, even beyond political will, even how we set up as a country from our governance and so forth. So one of the things that I would want to say as a closure is to thank everyone that has actually come. We really appreciate your inputs. I've taken a number of notes. I think people like Utatu Sohonti would have already been engaged by some of my research team members and so forth. So we will continue with the conversations, but already from the inputs that I've received here, it's really great to see that the thinking is not that much different in as far as where we want to go in the direction of the study. And mainly to us is to have an outcome that really resonates with the experiences, and also, let me put it this way, that resonates with people who are actually owners and custodians of the sector. And for that to happen, I must say that you can't have big businesses alone actually making inputs to work that we do, for instance, on how opportunities of SMMEs should be able to be created when SMMEs are available and are in the space. So it is for that reason why we will use platforms like this. And thank you to you, Babu Mngandi and the BMF for giving us that opportunity. And we hope that conversations will continue beyond this. And when we make these calls, and there is another process which we envisage to happen thereafter. Once obviously studies are finished and reports are submitted, we anticipate that SAIMI themselves would undergo a consultative process, which in my view, you should be part and parcel of the stakeholders that are really owning that process. And yeah, that's all, Chair, on my side. Thank you so much again, and have a great evening further.
Thanks, Mr. Socikwa. I must thank a superhero here called Mamelo, who designs the poster and manages this platform and manages a lot of other things, and who's going to make this recording available. I think if we could give her a round of applause so that she can keep doing more of these things, because they make us look like we are efficient when we don't do much. So thank you, colleagues, for coming out. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, my son. Thank you.
And go to colleagues and go to the call.